All right, so again, welcome. Today is our session on going further with study rules, building off of the basics that we covered last time, really wanting to do a deep dive into all the different combinations and options that we have in building different types of rules within ARM, and a special look at the new conditional study rules option as well. So to get started, I'll actually just dive right into ARM. And I have a trial open, nothing terribly special other than I do have a few study rules already put into this trial. And we'll also add a few more, or at least kind of click through some of the interface to show some of the other options as well. But really just kind of want to go through, as I said, more of the different types of rules that we didn't talk about last time. So last time we really just covered the most basic, probably also by far the most common types of rules, which is requiring or recommending that a field is filled in. So I need GPS coordinates in a trial. So, you know, put in the latitude, put in the longitude. Those two are required. Things like that. Definitely the most common ones, but we've got some other things we can do within the study rules. It can get more complicated. So first one to cover, they're I tried to order these in somewhat maybe more common to less common. Whether they're more or less useful would probably depend on your type of research, but the first one here is actually in the assessment data section. So here on the study rules tab, I'm in the assessment data. And it's this middle one over here on the predefined study rules. So these used to be kind of hard to find, and that was kind of part of the reason for this session that we ran a couple of years ago, was it was without this interface that we just added here recently. It was really hard to find some of these. We were only adding things within the table, so it could kind of get lost in the shuffle a little bit. Hopefully now there's a little more visibility to some of these types of rules. And we kind of call them predefined study rules over here on the right. So there's not a whole lot of configuration to them, as opposed to some of these other rule types where we kind of step through the different components to build the rule. Here it's all all or nothing, more or less. So the first one I wanted to highlight is this middle one. We're limiting the assessment crop and pest list to items selected in the site description. And if I turn that on here on the editor, you'll see down in this list, we created a new rule, and it's called limit validation list is the type here. It's a little vague, so we tried to make it a little more verbose here on the panel up above to kind of explain what the purpose is. And actually to kind of demonstrate what this unlocks, I'm going to go to the assessment data section. And so if we're in a assessment, whether I've already got my data filled in, but we'll just pretend that this is a new one. Here in the pest or the crop information, you'll see it actually has changed a little bit, and there's an extra field that you typically maybe wouldn't see before we had this rule on. And so when I open up the list here, instead of seeing the whole pest list like we typically would, I only get a list of the pests defined in this specific trial. So the advantage here being that in the site description, we can list out all of the pests of interest. And we have more documentation on details of those. And really here in the assessment data, it's more about just connecting up to those pests that we've seen and or crop. Kind of really the same thing would apply to the crop as well. So this study rule really unlocks the linking capability. So it's not possible for a trialist to accidentally pick the wrong pest code. Sometimes maybe you just get a hurry and you grab one that's similar but not quite the same as the one in the site description. And that kind of makes a mess when you go data summary, or if you're pooling everything together in a database, suddenly these assessments might just kind of disappear because there's a different pest that has been documented that doesn't exist anywhere else in the trial. And whether it's just the wrong code, or maybe that really is the right pest, but then they forgot to go back to the site description to fill it in. It kind of covers both ends of the spectrum, really ensuring that if you do have a pest that wasn't originally planned, that's not in this list, then we need to add it to the site description. Or conversely, I want to make sure that you're picking the right codes and not accidentally picking the wrong one. So if you're in a case where you're in a trial and you see this list and you're confused, why do I not see any other ones? That limit validation list rule is active. And if you do need a different pest, oh, surprise, surprise, there's a different disease we weren't planning on having, but we need to document it. There is a new button here at the bottom, and that will allow you or the trialist to go to the site description, and it's going to add in another pest. So here it's just asking me, I'm going to add a new pest. So it's just confirming, yeah, we'll put it as pest number 2. That's just fine. It's kind of a split window. I'll just drag this up because I don't have a lot of space. But here we have our existing pest filled in. Now it has added a second one. So I can go ahead and add that new code for whatever. I don't know if I have any, I don't even have any favorites. I'll just pick a random one here and put it in there. Now I can have that second pest available. So then when I return to fill in my assessment, I have that second, in this case, disease that I needed to document. So that's the goal of that limit validation list rule. Kind of less of a rule of you need to fill this in, but more of a tool or a functionality that can get turned on. And that's really a lot of the types of rules we're highlighting today is kind of just unlocking more functionality that's possible within ARM through these rules. So again, that was here the limit assessment crop and pest list items selected on the site description. And you can adjust the permission. We talked about permissions last week a little bit. The permission here is what licenses, who should be able to edit or remove this rule going forward. So the most common option would be everyone in my company. So that way a colleague of mine, if I'm the sponsor company setting this up, we get an update from the trialist that says, hey, there's some issue, I can't fulfill this rule or it's causing problems or something. They don't have to just find me, but anyone, any colleague that might be working with that trialist would be able to open up the trial and delete the rule or adjust it as needed, but still prevent the trialist from just saying, I don't really feel like following this rule, I'll just remove it. Because of course that would kind of defeat the purpose of a rule. So that's the permission to edit rule here that we can configure for each and every one of these rules, and the list really has that component to it. All right, moving on to the next rule type. I'm going to go into the treatment, and let's create a new treatment rule. And I'm just going to pick, maybe we'll pick treatment name. Nope, I'm looking for the lock field. It's not showing up here. let's go this way instead. Let's go into the treatment editor. It's kind of 50-50, and maybe your comfort level with the screen versus just going to the editor itself that you might want to manipulate and using the right click. So if you're having troubles finding a particular rule, that's the deal. It's kind of underneath the required heading. Talked about this last time. Again, use the right click. If you're in the screen, you want to affect the treatment name or maybe this particular row, the right click menu, kind of the last section, is related to study rules. And so we can add rules from the right click, and they'll show up on our rules editor. And the one I wanted to show over here under the required is the ability to lock a field to prevent edits from being made. So in my case here on the treatment editor, the field would really be the whole column. So right now I've clicked into the treatment name. And so if I want the treatment name to be locked down so that the name itself wouldn't get changed later on, I can lock that treatment name to prevent edits. And so you'll see that field got grayed out. There's kind of a little symbol here of a lock symbol, particular to the treatments editor here. Now, when I go, we'll go back to our study rules so we can adjust that rule we just added. Let me go down. Number 10 is incomplete. I'll just delete that one out of here. So now we've got this one we just added, and it's locked the treatment name. And here's why I was looking in the wrong spot. This is underneath the condition. So we're affecting the treatment name field, and we are locking the treatment line to prevent edits. And right now it's chosen just treatment line number 2, because that was the particular cell we were clicked into. But we can, adjust that if we wanted. Oops, I typed in the dash, but it did not recognize that. 2 through 6. There we go. I can adjust that to make that rule apply to more than one. So if I go back to my treatments editor now, you can see that actually all of those treatment names have been locked. And they're all grayed out there. So you can adjust kind of the scope of that particular rule. Or if I want every treatment line to be, have that name locked down, if I just delete that out, you'll see when it's empty, the word all gets put in there to show that actually it'll be all treatment lines will be, in this case, locking that treatment name field. And this is hooked up to the required and recommended type. So similar to, how a required, it becomes an error we talked about last time around, and then a recommended is just a little less strict. When we were validating a recommended rule is just a warning. So not quite as critical, but still is an alert, essentially. Kind of the same thing here with locking the treatment line. If you have it as required, then it's not going to be allowed to change that information. If you try to type into, try to click into the treatment name and start typing something different, there'll be a pop-up that says you cannot change this value, and it won't allow somebody to change the information. If you change this to recommended, then if you try to change the information, there'll be another pop-up, and it'll say that there's a recommended rule that this is locked, and basically just be a notification that you shouldn't change this information, unless you have a really good reason to. But ARM would allow the information to be changed. It'll just first show that dialogue. So that way the person making that change would be aware that, hey, you shouldn't do this, unless maybe you've already talked to your sponsor, unless there is some extreme situation that's requiring you to do this, then having that recommended rule gives the flexibility to the trialist, to the person making that change, that they still can in an extreme case, but at least they're warned about it each time. So that way there's that communication that this shouldn't be changed unless it really, really needs to. So a question here, looking at this rule we've added, it's asking if it's really then in effect locked the formulation concentrations as well. So as we've defined it here, I can go back to required, but as we've defined this here, we are only affecting the treatment name. So in theory, we could go in and change the formulation concentration by hand, and there is no rule affecting that value. Really, the only thing affected is in gray here with that lock. Now, there is another type of rule. So here we've locked within the treatment editor, we've locked this entire column. There is actually kind of the other direction of we could lock an entire row, which would then include the formulation information and really anything else that we filled in about the treatment. So that one, maybe I'll go down to this very last one. That one, instead of locking the field to prevent edits, you can lock a treatment line to prevent edits, or lock the whole treatment itself. So the difference between those two would be something like treatment 5 here, where we have multiple components in that particular treatment. So if I needed to lock just this MICO 60, I wanted just this specific line to be locked, I would lock treatment line, compared to if I wanted to effectively lock both of these rows, and if there was any other component we were to add to this treatment 5, then all of those components would be locked. So that's the difference between those two. But let's just go ahead and add a lock treatment line. And now you can see all the way across here that MICO 60 has everything locked down. So now we can't edit that information. And that is a totally separate study rule. So now we'll be able to see on our screen here that we have added a second one, the difference being the field, whether it's locking specifically treatment name or we're locking all treatment fields. So particularly for the treatment editor, there are a few other layers to what you want to lock down. Is it the row horizontally, or are we talking about that column, that field all the way across? In some other editors, so if we just hopped into like the site description, we can definitely lock a field. We'll just lock the city for whatever reason. You can right click there and you can lock a field in the site description as well if you wanted to. And see how that gets grayed out. Fewer combinations over here in the site description, of course, because there's not rows and columns in the table. Pretty cut and dried of just this field is locked. You can't change it. So that is the locking fields. And again, just to show interface-wise where that was, it is living in this condition section here. So something down here like our site description, we had talked about last time the conditions when you're requiring a field where you want it to actually be filled in. We had a lot of the different trial status values here. So that's what most of these are, our trial status. So like when a trial is marked final, then the general trial city field should be filled in. is what this rule as configured would do. There's also the always, which just immediately requires the field. But here then we found that lock field down in the condition, which changes that around really. So once it's filled in, it cannot be edited. All right. The next example is hidden fields. So we just talked about kind of locking information down so it can't be changed. We can also hide information. So again, kind of the sponsor to try list example, we'll say the sponsor has some information that's kind of confidential. That definitely when they put it into their database and their system, they want to be able to track, and yet wouldn't want somebody outside their company to see. You know, an example maybe would be some ingredient information about your treatments, or you know, something like that that you want to have hidden from certain people. So that is actually in our type here. So if let's see, oh, I thought I was in my treatments. Let's go back to the treatment name rule here. And I'm just going to thought it was in the type. There we go. Yep, hidden field. Okay. So if I set this type of rule to be a hidden field, now this is going to hide the treatment name field, so that entire column. And the important thing to fill out then here is the condition of when should that information be hidden. So here I've got two options. If it's not me, my specific license, or if not in my company. I think more commonly you'd probably want if not in my company, then that is going to hide the information, hide that whole field, whether there's information in it or not. Frankly, it's going to hide that entire column from somebody. So to demonstrate that, I actually already have a hidden field rule applied here. It is the description column in the treatments editor. And the trick to set this up, because it's a little hard to demonstrate in general, because if I go back to my treatment name hidden field, the fact that I'm the one that's hiding it means that I can still see that information. So treatment name is still completely visible to me because I have the permission to be able to see it. So a little hard usually to demonstrate here, but this trial that I have has hidden the treatment's description already. And you'll notice that the key here, how I did this was I added this rule with a different license than the one I'm using currently. So kind of acting as though the sponsor here, this GYELMA, was the owner of the trial. Maybe that's the sponsor company, had created this rule. And now they sent the trial to me. So because my license is not this GYELMA, then I don't have permission. Number one, I don't have permission to edit. You can see everything is grayed out. I can't change this rule. And because it's the hidden field and the condition is if not in my company, then I cannot see the description field in the treatments editor. So if we go over to the treatment editor and try to find that description, I can go to my view and turn on all fields and try as hard as we might, we will not find the description field. It's usually here. I remember exactly between which two it is, but it's usually in this first half here, and it is hidden. We cannot see it because we are not in that group of licenses that was specified in the rule. So that really brings us to the idea of ownership, which I think we've touched on a little bit, but it's kind of related to the permissions, but is fundamentally a little different. So each study rule that gets added has an owner to it. And so the license that creates that rule is the owner of the rule. And you can see there's the owner ID column. And that code that is there is what we call the GDM ID code. So it's just kind of a random list of letters, basically, or numbers. I think we can have numbers in there too. That gets assigned when your license is created here in our system as we create the license. So if you go to help about ARM, you'll see a listing of the details about your license, and one of the components there is that GDM ID code. So that's just kind of an identifier for a person that has an ARM license, essentially. And it's random. It's nothing to do with their name. You can't identify and guess somebody's ID code or anything like that. Not that that would matter anyway, because it is automatically put in when that rule is created. There's also another level to that ownership, and that is for a particular trial or a protocol. And you can see that under Tools About Study. You can see who is the owner. And so when a protocol is created, the license that creates that protocol is the owner of the protocol. Any trial that gets created from that protocol, whether or not that main person created it, they still kind of have some permissions. So we'll call that the protocol owner versus the trial owner. So in this case, the protocol owner was this XSZNAF. That person, will say, again, this is that sponsor type of person who set up the protocol. And then we sent the protocol to the trialist, and they created a trial. So then that would be this GYELMA person that created the trial. So that trialist has permissions as the trial owner to do certain things because they created that trial, but that protocol owner also has a role as well. Obviously, again, for that kind of contracted setup, it'd make a lot of sense that the person who originally set up the protocol obviously also has a significant role in that workflow, if you will. So this really is baked into each and every study rule, that when you create it, it knows who it was that created that rule. So that's over here on the owner ID. So right now I am this XSZNAF person, and these are all the rules we've added so far in this session. But these other rules here, they're all locked because I am not the person who created this rule. And the permission to edit this rule, I am not in the same company as that license. So you'll notice number 8 actually has anyone as the permission to edit rule. So I actually have the ability to adjust this rule if I needed to, because anyone can adjust it. Whereas the rest of these, I'm not able to change or delete the rule because I don't have the permission to do so. So kind of the two different, they're similar, similar in some ways, but different functionality of what we have here. And tying that back into our hidden field, we had that description. So because the condition here is not in my company, and it's tied to the person who created this rule, anyone not in the company of GYELMA cannot see that description column in the treatments editor. And I also chose description as the example here, just because I think the treatments editor is probably one of the more common places you may want to hide confidential information. Oops, go back to my ARM here. But it can be a little weird if you were to hide that treatment name column. So maybe there's a dummy name for the treatment that typically would get used, or a coded name that you would refer to each treatment if the true name needs to be confidential, or whatever information that we're talking about. So a lot of times that description column is a good place to put anything that shouldn't be seen. And then that way the treatment name, since that gets used in a lot of places, you can see it on the trial map can pull in the treatment name to build a little description, and in a lot of reports and stuff, it's nice to have that treatment name there. It can just be a little strange if you do hide that column. Certainly in all those other locations, that information will get hidden as well. So I can't just print a report and choose the description column here to be able to see that hidden information. It's totally turned off. There's no way for me to access it here. But just a tip for what information to hide. It might be good to move anything confidential that would make you want to hide the treatment name. Might be a little easier to put that in description instead. But again, you can do this for any other field as well. So here, for whatever reason, interim data due, I'm just kind of clicking on a random one in the site description, but there is a hidden field option as well for other locations as well. So you can hide other fields, not just the treatments editor. All right. So the next one that I'd like to show is strict validation. So that one, maybe we'll find a field. Let's go to the assessment data. And maybe we'll choose rating type. So let's just say we've got sometimes some struggles where our trialist just likes to freehand something into the rating type. And although, oh, I might already have that on. So maybe they're typing in some nonsense into the rating unit, and ARM, the standard definitions, we don't have too many things locked down to where we require that you pick from the list. So here, it is technically possible for somebody to type into the rating unit field if they wanted to. But if you, for your trials, don't want that for this particular field, like the rating unit, then you can add a strict validation rule. So I'll right click on rating unit. I gotta go down or right click for this editor, it's very long. And we have a strict validation study rule. There's really not much for a condition on this. It just is always on or not. But now that will require, if I click back into the rating unit and try to type in that nonsense, I type the letter N, it immediately brings up the validation list. It will not let me type something in, but instead immediately brings up my favorites, or I could pick something from the main list. But the key is there is no ability to type. As soon as I type, it brings up the list. It makes me choose something from the list. If I go back to the study rule to see that we have added the last one here, that is the type here is strict validation. So we can choose the field that we want to add this to. And again, the condition is always it's on or not. Since I was in the assessment editor, there's the selection for assessment columns. Probably for something like this, I would probably clear that out and say all columns should have that rating unit be a strict validation. So this way you can guarantee that if some information is filled in for that field, it is chosen from the drop-down list. And certainly that's available not just on the assessment data section, but there's other fields as well. There are other editors where you can do that too. But that can be very useful to make sure if a particular field has to get filled in, and you could stack it, you could require the rating unit be filled in as well. So I could create a new rule and it would be the same rating unit. And then I want to require that it's filled in when assessment data is. So kind of a 2-for-1 punch on the same field. Now I want to require that it gets filled in as soon as assessment data is entered. And not only does it need to be filled in, it also needs to be filled in from the validation list. So it's kind of nice. You can kind of stack rules and have multiple things being applied to a particular field even. And that works just fine. All right, going a little quicker through some of these other options. I want to go up to this top one here. Also in the assessment data section, this condition here is consistent entries. And I have one here, both is consistent entries across SE group number. And there's also one for consistent entries across rating timing. So both of these, I have selected the rating date field as the field that's being affected. So what this does is let's go to the assessment data. And I'll start with the rating timing and just kind of looking at our fields here. See if I've got rating timing visible. Yes, I do. So rating timing is a field here. If you haven't used it before, the goal of it is just to describe when an assessment is performed. And so here I've filled in and just put in like the number 1, both of these assessments that were done on the same day would be rating timing number 1. So the reason for the rule is to create consistent entries for different columns that have the same rating timing value. So here, column 3 and column 4 both have a rating timing of 1. So the rating date needs to be consistent. So ARM will make sure that it's consistent. The other bonus to that is when I fill in a rating date in column 3, because I have the consistent entries rule on, it actually automatically filled in the rating date for any other columns that had that same rating timing. Let me hide. So I have to keep scrolling, hide empty fields. That'll shrink this down a little bit. So the rating date immediately was filled in for column 4 because I had column 3 filled in, and they both have the same rating timing. So it can be a little time savings just to have things automatically filled in. If you were to come back to this column and try to change the date, there's going to be a warning that says there's this consistent entries rule. Now that you've changed this value, it's going to adjust any other column that has that same rating timing. So if I say, yes, it actually is December 30th, then both of these need to be the same. So I click OK, and they both are updated to be that same date. And it's not possible for us to make them out of sync. So if I click cancel, it's not going to change this value either. They have to both be the same. So the one field we chose was rating timing to make sure that that's in sync based on our rating timing value. Kind of the exact same thing, but just a different field to base this on is this SE group number. And really that is just related to if you're loading an SE, and looks like I haven't loaded one in. Oh, yes, we did. So if you're using an SE, standard evaluation, and you're loading in one that has more than one assessment column. So here's one, fungicide 18, it looks like is the rule I loaded. It created 2 assessments for me. This SE group number is just automatically filled in. The number itself matters not at all, but you'll see that these 2 columns both are group 14. So when you loaded an SE with multiple columns, that's how ARM knows those are all related. They all came in together. So it's just the very same thing now. If I fill in a rating date, it's going to fill in that other column as well. So that's consistent entries, whether it's the SE group number or rating timing. All right, in the interest of time, I think I'm going to skip ahead to the conditional study rules. And then we can come back to just a couple of other ones that I think are a lot less commonly used anyway for rules. If we've got time, we'll cover them. But I wanted to show the new functionality here. So let me create a new study rule. And maybe we'll start with the PowerPoint slides real quick to explain what I mean by a conditional study rule. And so really what we've added is the ability to define when a study rule should be activated based on a different field. So earlier, when we were talking about required and recommended rules in last session, they were all tied to the trial status. When you set the status to interim, then this rule kicks in. When the trial status is set to final, now you can require the harvest date or whatever. It was kind of hard coded. You could only use the trial status field as the trigger for when a rule kicks in. This conditional option now allows you to choose something besides trial status. I can find a different field in my trial to be the trigger for a rule I create. So the example on the screen here is that we require that the planting rate for my crop should be filled in, but only once the planting date is filled in. So I've defined the planting rate. That's the field I am creating a rule for, but that rule will only kick in. It will only start to require that rule when the planting date, so I've defined this other field, the planting date, once that is not blank, is actually how I've defined it in this case. So of course, brand new trial, the planting date is empty, so this condition won't be fulfilled yet. And thus, there will be no validation error about a planting rate. But as soon as somebody comes in and fills in a planting date, then we'll have this planting rate rule will kick in, and we'll need somebody to fill in that rate as well. So that's the idea behind the conditional rule. Of course, we're kind of dealing with some logic to set this up. So this is the screen you'll see in ARM to kind of help guide you to creating that conditional statement, essentially. And so here you can make this conditional, these rules within the rule, if you will, based on multiple different fields. Or within a single field, you can choose multiple values. So here in this example, I'm going to require that the GPS accuracy field in my general trial, I want to require that that's filled in when the site and design, the site type field equals a field or an orchard or I think that's a plot, a research plot, I think is that. So I'm choosing multiple different categories or values from the site type list. And then in addition to caring about the site type, we can also care about the trial origin field on the header, for example. And so only for trials that are marked as C. So you can pick multiple fields or within a field, multiple values. So let me just go back and let's try to create that one. Let me go to site description, new rule. And we said general trial GPS accuracy, or whichever field it is that we care about. And we're going to require that field. Anyone in my company can change this, that's fine. The condition now, again, instead of choosing a trial status, we would mark this as a conditional rule. This is active conditionally. Specifically, if I click this edit button, then we get this dialog to build that statement of when should this rule, when should this field be required? And so we can go ahead and choose the fields we care about. We had said the site and design. So I clicked the S button to kind of jump down to the first thing that started with an S. Site and design, site type it was a field maybe that we want to use. And if that equals, and here this brings the list of the site type values. And whether I use my favorites, which is empty, or the full list, I can go ahead and choose whatever values I would want. And clicking or lets me pick another value from the site type. So, okay, it could be, we do field work. Maybe if we have an orchard, I care about that as well. That would definitely have a GPS coordinate that I need to have tracked. Maybe one more. Let's look at this list. And we had the research plot. There we go. So those are typically the ones people would fill in for some location out there that I definitely want to have. Kind of thinking maybe I don't need, if it's a greenhouse, for example, I don't need the GPS coordinates because I'll know the location of that greenhouse and that's all I need. So we kind of dropping out certain types of trials that might not need to have the GPS accuracy filled in. And here I can go under the header, and we had talked about maybe the trial origin. And that we only care about if it's a contracted trial. Because if it's an in-house, we probably have the GPS coordinates saved, or the accuracy of our GPS coordinates saved somewhere, or whatever the example might be. But that's how you can kind of build that conditional statement. And when I click OK, then ARM will kind of translate that, basically what we've just configured, into this long sentence that's got equal signs and ands and ors and kind of a mess. Probably wouldn't really feel like hand typing that in, which is nice. We've got that edit, so you can use the interface to get that logic straight instead of just typing something in and hope it works. So that is the conditional, and that is related to this one specific rule here. You can see now it's marked as a conditional. So a lot of possibilities unlocked there. Just a couple of examples. as I kind of work through some examples and ideas for what you could use this for. Obviously, I mean, the options are almost endless, but kind of two different categories kind of jumped out as maybe two different ways of working with these conditionals, the things you might want to be able to do that this conditional part of the rule really can unlock. And the first one's about timing. That was kind of the one we gave a minute ago, where you're using the contents of one field to trigger another field. So maybe using the crop for example now. Once the harvest date is filled in, then we know a harvest has occurred. So we can require maybe the % standard moisture field now. So obviously we wouldn't want to require the % standard moisture at the very beginning of the trial. It's not going to make any sense to require that, because if the harvest hasn't happened yet, then why are we getting error messages about the standard moisture? So it's kind of fine tuning that requirement to, well, when should that rule for % standard moisture, when should that actually kick in? Well, it should only kick in once a harvest date is put in. So kind of getting the timing of that field. And again, previously it was always just based on the trial status. Well, now we can be even more specific and more clever with the timings, because it doesn't have to just be the trial status field. We can find any other field in the whole trial that could be our leverage point for when to require something. And the other type, another use for conditionals would really be to include or exclude whether a rule even matters in the first place based on the type of trial that you have. So, maybe you use the discipline field in the site description. That's a good categorization of the trial as a whole. Whether it's fungicide, or I think my example was then, if you pick biostimulant, then suddenly for all of our biostimulant studies, we're going to need this, and we're going to need this, and we're going to need this. Whereas, none of those things matter if it's a fungicide, or vice versa, whatever you're doing in your work. But that can be a good field where we really can then know what type of study is this. And then we know what we need or don't need, things like that, based on this discipline field, for example. So really the idea there is maybe being able to kind of upgrade your global rule set. And we kind of talked about that last week when we created a set of rules and we save those to a file so we can use them again and again. One common strategy then is to make this baseline list of, well, every single trial that we'd ever do needs this and this and this. And then maybe you'd go through and think of all our biostimulant studies, we would need this and this and this, and you create a separate set, and then you can get these list of different sets that need to be loaded in different trials. Maybe instead, you can create a truly global rule set with a whole lot of rules in them, but then they get weeded out based on something like discipline or whatever other trigger you may have, to where, sure, I've got 200 study rules loaded into this trial, but only 75 of them will ever actually be active, just depending on what's chosen in the discipline or what's chosen in a header field, or whatever you might want to base that logic on. So I think there's a lot of possibilities. The trouble is, number one, for a training, it's very hard to be general and yet also specific to, to build and show something. And it probably is pretty specific to, your outcomes in your research. But if this does sound interesting to you, but you're not quite sure how to build in the logic or what would work, contact us. Shoot us an email. or we can get on a Zoom meeting or something to talk through that, kind of help with the logic of how to accomplish those things. But I really see this conditional being a big door opening for the world of rules and being able to make things smarter, because that's kind of one downside that we see occasionally. We'll work with a sponsor group and get them all excited about rules, and they get this really great rule set in all their trials. And then 3 months later, mid-season, we get an email. Well, we've got this one problem. Just this one trial is different. They're doing this something different over there out west, and this rule we added is causing them problems. It's working great for everyone else, but it's caused this group a problem. And I think that conditional will be another way to help that, instead of having to say, well, okay, forget about that rule in our global list because it messed that one person up. Instead, it can be, okay, well, let's just put in a conditional. So if it is that biostimulant group or whatever it was that triggered the problem, let's just factor in a condition to drop out that type of study. So that rule doesn't happen for those people, but everyone else, all those other trials we're doing, that rule still kicks in. So that's my PSA, I guess, on the conditional rules. Kind of ran out of time to cover every other rule. I didn't have a whole lot left. I did just want to point out real quickly, and we kind of showed one of the examples of these predefined rules. But kind of on each section, there are a few different ones. There's a trial review. There is kind of a strict validation, but specifically for SEs. Not a whole lot in the protocol description, but you'll find more of these in the settings tab. Most of that's just locking a field that's on the settings editor. And that really shows up as a pop-up dialog. So it just behaves a little differently, but same idea. And then the trial has a few other toggle, we'll call them toggle rules, where you just turn them on or turn them off. You can lock the trial name to match the trial ID or the protocol ID. You can turn on a review process, which is really nice. So you can have, you can request that a trial be marked as reviewed. And there's a little box in the settings editor for that, and it links who is doing that. You can also require that the study rules are reviewed. So if you send the trial to a trial list, the very first time they open it up, the list of rules shows up, and you have them sign off and say, I confirm, I've looked at these rules, I'm acknowledging they're there, and I'll follow them, essentially. So you can use that. And then there's also a signature feature. We kind of ran out of time to show that, but you can have require or request that signature gets added to a rule as well. All right, well, we've reached our hour. I have a couple minutes if you did have a question you wanted answered, but I don't want to hold anyone hostage either. I want to thank you for joining us today. Hopefully you have a happy and healthy holiday season, kind of right in the middle of it. Don't have any webinars upcoming planned. Probably look for them in maybe February. I think we'll take the month of January off, but we'll be sure to send an email out once we get more scheduled in the new year. So thanks everybody, and you know, shout us out if you do have questions trying to get some of these rules worked in. It's great to kind of talk to groups about their needs. It's hard to generalize. So thanks again.